They dug a lake on my land while I was in Chattanooga, helping my brother load a moving truck. Not some cute koi pond you hide behind a shrub, but a 2-acre hole lined with clay, already half full from the spring, that's fed our creek for as long as anyone can remember. And by the time I rolled back over the ridge, blue sat where pasture should be, and my heart did that slow, awful drop. Name's Daniel Mercer. My family's had this 480 acres up in northern Alabama since 1962. Rolling hills, longleaf pines, a cold little creek, and a stacked stone fence that rides the ridge like a backbone. My granddad used to rest his boot on those stones and say, "Land's the only thing they ain't making more of, Danny. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." I believed him, which is to say I respected lines the way some folks respect their mama's china, fragile, important, not to be messed with. For 30 years, the land south of that fence belonged to Mr. Rollins, a cattleman who nodded more than he spoke. If a cow wandered, we walked it back. If a tree crashed the fence, we split the work. Then Mr. Rollins died. The place sold to a couple from Nashville, Brent and Laurel Whitaker, polished mid-40s, always in athleisure, like they might go from pruning to Pilates. "We're your new neighbors," Brent announced the first time he rolled up in a shiny side-by-side grin wide like he'd discovered a private Yellowstone. I wiped sweat off my brow, pointed to the stone line, and said, "Welcome." He looked at it for maybe 3 seconds and said, "Good to know, thinking about a water feature." I laughed then. I didn't know how fast names and fences could turn into problems. 3 months later, I was back from helping Caleb move, and I took the dirt path out, windows down, heat pressing through the cab. Cresting the ridge, I saw blue where there shouldn't be blue. A basin cut out of hardwood and pasture exposed red clay tire tracks leading like punctuation. My spring, the one that feeds our creek, had been redirected. I walked down, and the smell of churned clay and diesel was thick. They'd changed the shape of my land. Brent answered the phone like it was no big deal. Our contractor verified the boundary, he said, cheerful, until the word boundary got tight. We hired a licensed surveyor. I told him the stone fence. He sighed like I'd interrupted his schedule. "Fences don't always match surveys, Daniel. They'd drop $35,000 into a gamble." That was the first crack. I called Harold Bennett, old Harold who measures twice, then measures again, the sort of surveyor who's more patient than he is flashy. He walked the fence, thumbed through county plats older than my granddad, and tapped the paper. "This goes back to 1871, he said, annoyed more than surprised. "Those stones line up with original markers. There's no gray area." He put together a boundary affidavit. We sent certified notice, 18 days to restore the land. I figured that would be the end. A week later, a Nashville law firm landed on my kitchen table with language so polished it might have been buttered reliance on a licensed surveyor, improvements made in good faith, vigorously contested. They were polite in print and proud in person. Brent waved the lawyer's letter like it was a shield. He and Laurel sat on the new dock, yes, a dock, arms bare, wine glasses glinting like they were already starring in a catalog spread. "We'll sort it out in court if we have to," he said. I drove away quiet. The kind of quiet that's not peace exactly, more a loading of something heavy. Harold filed the affidavit with the county and submitted a land disturbance complaint which put a clock on the mess. Still, they kept building. They planted ornamental grasses along the bank, set in a small stone fire pit, staked a dock like it had been there for years. I'll admit it, for a beat, I thought it did look pretty in the golden light, but Granddad's voice came back, "You let one thing slide, you teach people how to treat you." So I did what anyone who believes in lines would do. I let the legal process run its course. In the preliminary hearing, the judge, a woman in her early 60s, sharp eyes, zero patience for nonsense, listened to Harold lay out old deeds, overlays, photos of the fence through decades. The other side's survey leaned on GPS approximations and crucially had ignored the physical monuments, the stones themselves. The judge's ruling was flat and absolute. The stone fence is a recognized historical boundary. The excavation lies within my property. 21 days to restore the land or authorize me to do it at their expense. No fireworks, just a gavel and a deadline. That's where the story should have ended. It didn't. People with money and lawyers are more stubborn than jury instructions. For 21 days, they doubled down, landscapers, a fire pit, more planting, the dock, perfecting its sunset selfies. On day 22, I called Curtis Hale, owner of Hale Earthworks. He's the kind of man who moves earth like a surgeon moves bone, steady, no drama. You sure about this? He asked. I said I had the order. He came out at sunrise 2 days later with 2 bulldozers and 3 dump trucks. Harold had his clipboard documenting everything. Brent and Laurel weren't outside. Their windows were dark. Curtis's blade cut into the bank, the first push louder than a church bell swings. Wet clay collapsed, water surged, mud fought like an animal. The dock tipped, the fountain pipes hissed as they were pulled, and by mid-morning Brent's pickup came roaring down his drive. He jumped out, face raw. You can't just... he began, then stopped when Harold held up the court order. We gave you 21 days, I said, and for the first time my voice had a coldness I didn't like. Curtis and his crew worked methodically, layers and banks back to the natural contour, the fountain pipes hauled off in sections. It wasn't revenge theater, it was boundary enforcement. Within 48 hours the water was gone, mud thick where water had been, and the place smelled like turned earth and closure. Brent said, "You'll regret this, the way people say things when they want to sound dangerous but sound tired instead." I watched the flattened ground and felt relief, but also a weight I hadn't expected, the sense that once you take a neighbor to the mat, you don't get the same neighbor back. And then, because people with lawyers have long arms, they sued me. Destruction of private property, loss of investment, emotional distress, the works. They even had the nerve to label my actions malicious interference with land enjoyment. Reading that, I laughed out loud in the kitchen, which is how I knew I was still ridiculous enough to be angry. Harold didn't laugh. "They're throwing everything at the wall," he said, flipping the complaint like he was waiting for something to stick. At the big hearing 6 weeks later, Brent looked thinner, the grin gone. Their attorney argued that I'd been premature, that restoration should have been stayed while they appealed. The judge asked 2 simple questions. Did you file an appeal within the statutory period? No. Did you request a stay of enforcement? No. The order stood. Dismissed before lunch. Clean direct. But there was more. Harold's documentation had caught environmental damage, crushed sapling silt in the downstream channel. The court awarded me survey fees and just under $10,000 for remediation and timber loss. When the judge read that number, something small broke in Brent, a human sag, I almost felt sorry for. I didn't want him ruined. I wanted the line respected. Maybe that's what set us apart. He saw a strip of dirt as inventory, I saw it as legacy. Here's the twist I didn't see coming, not the legal twist, but the human one. During the court process, a young guy showed up unexpectedly in the back of the courtroom, the contractor's foreman, a kid named Miguel, who'd been on the ground that first week. He'd been quiet until he'd heard the judge ask about the surveyor's procedures, then something in him shifted. He asked to talk to Harold, then to the judge, and under a solemn sort of pressure, he said what made the room tilt: the crew had moved the stakes. He'd watched a licensed-looking piece of paper get stamped, and then watched the work start before anyone had double-checked the old monuments. He said, "We were told to trust the mark. I wish I'd walked the fence." That confession didn't change the law, the fence and the deed did that, but it changed how people looked at Brent and Laurel. Pride City money and a contractor wanting to keep his job had created a chain of decisions that neither of them fully owned. Afterwards, Brent tried to say we could have worked it out, that the lake could have been shared, that it would have added value for both properties. Maybe. I kept thinking about what my granddad said, take care of it, and it'll take care of you, and about what happens when you trade a line in the dirt for a line in a ledger. They listed the place the next spring. Word travels fast in small counties. When the new owners finally came by, they brought a pie and manners. "Heard about the fence," the husband said. "We don't plan on testing it." First neighborly thing I'd had in almost 2 years. People ask me if I enjoyed watching the lake disappear. They expect a little smugness, like the kind you get in a courtroom drama where the right guy gets the last word. I didn't enjoy it. There was a weightier feeling standing there while the last water drained, finality. A sense that something else died besides the lake. The illusion that common sense will always win before it gets to lawyers. I lost that. But I gained clarity. Boundaries are physical, sure, but they're psychological too. When you let one thing slide, you teach the next person where the line is. When you step back again and again, eventually you stand in unfamiliar ground and wonder how that happened. Would I do anything differently? Maybe I'd have insisted on a joint survey the minute the first excavator showed up instead of hoping a certified letter would be enough. Maybe I'd have hired counsel earlier. Not because I like lawyers, but because some fights ain't about facts as much as the people willing to push them. But filling the lake back in, I don't regret that. It wasn't about $35,000. It was a choice. Let someone redefine what's yours because they've got deeper pockets, or draw a line and accept whatever comes down the road. So, what would you have done if you were in my boots? Would you have tried to negotiate, sold them that strip and taken the money, or called in the bulldozers the minute the deadline slipped? Do you think Brent and Laurel were reckless or just overly confident in the people they hired? At what point does what looks like good faith flip into arrogance? Drop your thoughts below. I read more of those comments than folks might expect, and I'm genuinely curious where people land. Share this with someone who's ever had a pushy neighbor, a boundary dispute, or a moment when standing your ground cost more than backing down. Because in the end, this wasn't really about a lake. It was about whether a line in the dirt still means something when someone decides it doesn't. I'll be around to read what you say.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.